Paulo Costa recently spoke out regarding his much-promoted fight with Robert Whittaker. He said that the UFC announced the fight before any contract talks had happened. Costa then confirmed that the bout won't be happening for UFC 284 in February. This came as a surprise to many fight fans who had been eagerly awaiting the match since it was initially publicized in October. To find out more, keep watching. First up, uncovering Paulo Costa's negotiations with the UFC. From what we've heard, Paulo Costa and the UFC had been working out the details for a spectacular fight against Robert Whittaker at UFC 284. The offer from the promotion included a contract with a total of $500,000 for 4 fights. While the amount offered was more than impressive, Costa had an issue with the number of fights initially presented. They wanted the same contract for 6 fights at first, and for the 31-year-old, it was too many for his liking. As the negotiations stalled, the planned fight was inevitably canceled. The resulting situation was not only a missed opportunity for Costa, but also signaled uncertain times ahead for his next move with the UFC. Though the promotion had wanted a long-term agreement of 6 fights attached to the hefty sum, Costa couldn't agree to the terms and refused to turn a blind eye to it. So here we are with a surprise stalemate where a much-anticipated fight was unable to come to fruition. Up next, the Brazilian MMA reveals how things went down. On Wednesday, UFC middleweight challenger Paulo Costa took to the MMA Hour to voice his objection to the proposed terms to face Robert Whittaker in the main event set in Australia. The Brazilian mixed martial artist remarked that the career low figure of $70,000 on offer from the UFC president Dana White's lawyer, UFC chief business officer Hunter Campbell, was not nearly enough for the caliber of the bout. Going on to explain that he was being asked to sign a 6-fight deal, Costa suggested that such an arrangement did not make sense to him, and he only wanted to discuss the immediate fight, not a potential series of future bouts. Remarking on his past experience of doing a similar deal 5 years prior, Costa attributed the current situation to his then naivety and poor decision-making, which he was now paying the price for due to the outdated terms that were being presented. Knowing the difficulty in transforming his standing with the organization, Costa talked about how his previous contract of 2017 had already impeded his ability to garner fair compensation. Bristling at the suggestion of more fights instead of focusing on the bout at hand, he reaffirmed that their terms were unacceptable. Now for sign the contract or be pressurized. The UFC didn't take no for an answer. In response to the UFC's move to publicize a fight between himself and Robert Whittaker on the 12th of February at a pay-per-view event in Perth, Paulo Costa has refuted the suggestion that the bout was confirmed. He said that while he had not come to terms, he found suitable or accepted $70,000 to show and $70,000 to win the offer in his previous agreement. No official arrangements had been made. What's more, the Brazilian asserted that the UFC was simply attempting to put pressure on him to sign up and sign off on the deal, which didn't surprise him, considering that tactic had been utilized previously. He stated his case concisely and insisted that he was just putting out the truth and that it was a false notion that it would be taking place. On top of that, Costa stated that his agreement to fight Whittaker at the pay-per-view event was only in principle because they had not agreed on appropriate terms at all. The UFC announced the fight anyway, which Costa felt was merely an attempt to use public pressure to get him to sign a contract that didn't offer enough compensation. Not to mention, Costa's negotiations with the UFC reveal how Brazilian fighters struggle. According to Costa, Brazilian fighters are often put at a disadvantage during negotiations due to their pride and willingness to accept any offer. He expressed his frustration on being taken advantage of and not standing up to management's practices of offering low, unvalued payments. Instead of taking back control, most Brazilian fighters just agree at the cost of their own financial stability, leading to them not being properly compensated for their work. By stating this, Costa is urging fellow fighters to recognize the importance of negotiating fair contracts and the "if you're good at something, don't "don't do it for free" proverb is applicable in this situation. What's more, the 31-year-old went on to say that many Brazilian fighters feel obligated to accept any offers, which often results in long-term agreements with low pay, a state of affairs that leaves athletes in a disadvantageous spot. He has come to the realization that with such power plays taking place during contract negotiations, it is necessary to step up and stand up for their right to better pay and better contract terms. It's time to take a stand and not just do something for the sake of doing it. There should be a measure of respect involved when bargaining with another party. If one's expertise and efforts are not accurately reflected in the agreement, it's best to walk away and look elsewhere for worthwhile opportunities. Moving on, against all odds, Costa refuses to bow down to unjust contract terms. Paulo Costa is finding himself in a peculiar position with the UFC. He believes that if the promotion would act more flexibly and with greater willingness, the fight against Whittaker could happen. But because of the current stalemate that exists, the Brazilian is simply hanging in the balance right now. As his contract has a reachable end date, he's expecting that he'll no longer be held back by it come March 2023. The lack of the UFC's willingness to be flexible has had devastating effects on Paulo Costa and his career. The situation looks complex, with no clear solution in sight, and was only made bearable by the introduction of a sunset clause. He now has to wait until March 2023 to become a free agent, unless the UFC makes efforts to find a mutually agreeable outcome. So in the end, Costa and other fighters like him are reliant on the UFC making changes to their policies and approach to ensure the situation for fighters is more favorable. What's more, is there a possibility that Costa versus Whittaker will happen? Costa has stated the UFC 284 event would not be feasible due to a lack of time to ready himself properly. And while he would accept a match with Robert Whittaker, he's not quite ready to agree to the proposed amount of $50,000. He believes it's far from proper negotiation, as the offer is more of a take it or leave it. He prefers to meet in the middle should the UFC come to an understanding about what he believes is a fair sum for his time and effort. The 31-year-old is willing to work hard for a fight as long as he gets what he feels is rightfully deserved. All Costa desires is for the UFC to listen to what he wants and then offer and counter off in good faith. If a collective deal can be reached for his services, he insists he'd be ready to go and give it his all. Coming up, the 31-year-old plans on breaking away from the UFC. The UFC middleweight competitor also recently expressed his enthusiasm for becoming a free agent again soon. During a talk with Ariel Helwani, he shared his realization that his current contract's final fight was still ahead. He lamented that the conditions of his contract have not kept pace with his performance and the level at which he is competing. Receiving only a meager $35,000 when he fought Marvin Vettori made the issue even worse. Though he feels he deserves better and is not completely satisfied, Costa expressed a desire to approach the negotiations calmly and find a workable outcome. He admitted that this was a common concern among fighters, and his situation was not unique. Though he is looking forward to the increased freedom and potential better opportunities that await him after his next fight, he also seeks a beneficial outcome to the current contract. He hopes to eventually reach a mutually beneficial arrangement that rewards him better for his performance. Up next, Robert Whittaker confirms the news. On his birthday, Robert Whittaker, the former middleweight champion, confirmed with sadness that his fight with Paulo Costa for the UFC 284 card in Perth will not take place. The UFC tried its best to follow through with the match, but according to Whittaker, even the offer of a new contract by the organization was not enough to influence Costa and make it happen. To everyone's disappointment, the Perth fight is off, and the organization is looking to reschedule sometime between March and April. It is an unpleasant situation, as both fighters have invested a great deal of time and energy preparing for the match and looking forward to testing their might in the ring. Wishful thinking that they would be able to meet in the cage and discover whose superior technique would prevail is now dashed. All the while, Robert Whittaker wants to assure his fans that he is still training in the hope of being able to take the ring very soon. Following up, Whittaker's frustration with the fight's cancellation. Whittaker expressed his deep disappointment regarding the sudden turn of events. He had expended a great deal of energy in preparing for his now canceled match and had even dreamed of a successful fight. The financial implications of the news were not lost on him either, and he talked about how his family would miss out on being able to treat themselves over the holidays and make ends meet as a result of the turn of events. Whittaker's frustration and sorrow were palpable, as he mentioned how very upsetting this situation was for him. Last but not least, Costa's response to Whittaker. Costa has been quite vocal regarding the fact that no contract had been signed for the fight, calling it fake news recently, and speaking out against the UFC for promoting it as a confirmed matchup. On Tuesday morning, in response to Whittaker branding him a notorious troll, Costa drew attention to the truth surrounding the fight that the UFC had failed to tell Whittaker. He expressed understanding of Whittaker's plight, but reiterated that nothing had been paid out to him, resulting in him withdrawing from the fight. That's a wrap for this video. What are your thoughts on the matter? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.